Okay, good morning. Today, continue on with some more readings from the book Forest Recollections. And today I wanted to read the second half of the chapter on facing fear, which has a lot of stories about the Kruba Ajahns' time spent living in charnel grounds. And first I wanted to begin with a few other stories that are under a chapter called The Power of the Dhamma. What gave Tudong monks confidence when wandering alone through dense forests or high mountains? In addition to strong mindfulness, 4 convictions were instrumental in protecting them. First, they believed in the merit of the Tudong practice. If they strictly adhered to Sila and its precepts, the Dhamma would protect them. With the Tudong robe draped over their bodies, they felt they could face any danger. After a sudden encounter with an elephant, Ajahn Mun told his disciples, quote, "Seeing the color of our robes, the elephant knew that we were harmless to him." Second, the Tudong monks had trust in their Ajahn. They believed that he would not send them off to a wholly unfamiliar place. Previous Tudong teachers had survived sojourns in the caves or the mountains where they stayed. When Ajahn Mun sent young Ajahn Lee to meditate alone on a mountain in Lamphun, he told Ajahn Lee that although the mountain was guarded by a fierce spirit, it would not harm Dhamma practitioners. Third, the monks had faith in the law of karma and in the good they had done by not harming any creatures, no matter how small. Ajahn Law's account is an example of the monk's belief in the protective power of metta, loving kindness. In his wandering, Ajahn Law often came across big snakes. When he told Ajahn Mun about his instinctive fear of snakes, the teacher responded, "Why be afraid? If you're devoured by a snake, simply brace your feet against its stomach wall." Ajahn Mun probably meant that then the snake would not be able to swallow Ajahn Law all the way down. He was surely joking, but his reply suggests that his meditation training had enabled Ajahn Mun to overcome much fear. He wanted Ajahn Law to understand that encountering a snake need not be a horrible experience. After Ajahn Mun's death, Ajahn Law went to southern Thailand, and here he put Ajahn Mun's advice to the test. In 1953, while wandering in Phang province, the local villagers guided Ajahn Law to a rock shelter at Turtle Mountain Cave. The shelter had a platform for sitting or sleeping, raised 1/2 meter off the ground. Here Ajahn Law spent a week meditating. Quote, "I arrived in the afternoon and lay down for a rest under an overhanging rock," he recalls. "A big snake came crawling from the north along the cliff to the edge of my platform. Slowly it crept forward and raised its body 1/2 meter off the ground. Its eyes were as big as my thumb. I sat up with my legs folded on the platform. By now its head was less than an arm's length away. Its body was over 4 meters long and about 10 centimeters in diameter. It looked at me quietly. Ajahn Law was afraid, yet he observed the snake carefully. Then he waved his hands at the snake and said, 'Go away, go over there. Why suspect me? I send metta to you every day, not only to you, but to all sentient beings, which I consider as fellow beings. May all beings be happy. Go, go.' The snake then crawled toward the spirit shrine nearby and eventually went into a deep hole underneath the rock shelter. Quote, "About 10 minutes later, it came right back, approaching the edge of the platform. More mindful this time, I spoke while waving my arm at the snake. 'Go, go, go, go away. Don't you hear me? I'm not here to dig any treasure from the earth or the water. Go away.' The snake moved backward 1 handbreadth. Its tail pointed forward and then went back into the hole." Ajahn Law seems to have thought that the snake might be a guardian spirit of a treasure in the area. But after he pondered the incident, Ajahn Law decided that the snake was neither a spirit nor devata, deity, in disguise. He thought that the snake might be connected to him through past karma and wanted to test the extent of his fear by seeing if he would grab a stick to hit it. Ajahn Law believed that he was saved by the power of the triple gem and also the purity of his heart, which held no harmful intentions towards the animals. A fourth source of the Tudong monks' confidence was their belief that tigers, wild elephants, and snakes were devatas or guardian spirits that had disguised themselves as animals and had come to test the depth of a monk's understanding and faith. Another of Ajahn Chop's encounters illustrates this belief. In the late 1930s, Ajahn Chop wandered into the Shan states. On one occasion, he went to meditate alone in a mountain cave. After a period of sitting meditation one evening, he opened his eyes and saw a big tiger sitting at the entrance of the cave. Perhaps because of his frequent encounters with tigers in the past, Ajahn Chop was not afraid this time. Both man and beast looked at each other silently. After a few moments, the tiger casually leapt to a flat rock near the mouth of the cave about 2 meters away. Ajahn Chop observed the tiger mindfully. Oblivious to the monk, it started cleaning itself and licking its paws. Having cleaned itself, it rested on the rock, sitting like a dog. Although Ajahn Chop had no conscious fear of the tiger, according to his biographer, quote, he admitted that he was unable to do his usual walking meditation at the cave entrance. This would bring him too close to the rock where the tiger was sitting meditation on the small platform inside the cave. He could not help feeling uneasy, so he continued to sit meditation. He thought that the tiger would not stay there very long, but to his disappointment, it appeared that the tiger was taking up permanent residence there. When dusk fell, Ajahn Chop lit a candle and noticed that the tiger paid no attention to the light. He hung his mosquito net over his glot, went inside the glot, and sat in meditation until it was time to rest. He woke up around 3 a.m., put the mosquito net away, and lit a candle. The tiger was still lying there. Now it was time to go for alms. To get out of the cave, he would have to pass within a meter of the tiger. Putting his rope on, Ajahn Chop kept glancing at the tiger and saw that it was watching him. Quote, its eyes are as soft as a dog watching its master, Ajahn Chop thought. Preparing to leave the cave, the monk spoke to the tiger calmly. It's time for me to go on my alms round. I need food to sustain my body, as all animals and people do. Please allow me to leave. You may stay here or go out for your own food as you wish. He then walked out of the cave, passing the rock where the tiger lay. Ajahn Chop went to a nearby hamlet for alms food, but he did not mention the tiger for fear that it would upset the householders. By the time he returned to the cave, the tiger was gone. Reflecting on the situation, Ajahn Chop thought that this particular tiger must have been a devata who had taken the form of a tiger to test him. In the nights that followed, he often heard tigers growling, but the animal did not return while he was staying there. The experiences of these Tudong monks who survived in the wilderness confirmed their beliefs in the power of the Dhamma. As Ajahn Mun told his disciples, quote, from such a mind an attacker will draw back, be it a tiger, a snake, or an elephant. The aspirant may even be able to walk right up to it. His attitude toward animals is based on metta, which has a mysterious but real and profound influence. It is true that animals do not know this, but they can feel and sense it. This is the power of Dhamma which gives protection to the aspirant, meanwhile softening or neutralizing the ferocity of the animals. This is the mysterious power of mind, which is self-evident, but which is still difficult for others to realize who have not yet developed to the same level. And now the next section is on charnel grounds. All 10 wandering monks observed another important Tudong practice, that of staying in a charnel ground. In the past, cemeteries were not like they are today. As one Tudong monk describes them, quote, unburied bodies were scattered all over the place, old bodies and new, scattered around like logs. When you saw them, you'd see clear evidence with your own eyes. Of our 10 monks, only Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Lee have described their experiences at a forest cemetery in detail. All Tudong monks, however, mention their encounter with ghosts or local spirits. Such experiences were not unusual, since the monks grew up in villages where belief in ghosts and spirits came naturally. When a wandering monk arrived in a village at dusk, the inhabitants would often lead him to a cemetery or to a tract of forest that they believed was inhabited by malevolent spirits. The villagers did not always tell the monk where they were taking him. They decided this among themselves without consulting the monk. Although not all Tudong monks would choose to stay in a cemetery, they usually complied with the villagers' wishes. In fact, the experienced monks often sought such a place, generally avoided by others, so they could practice meditation undisturbed. For those monks who were afraid of ghosts, the experience was often transformative, as the following example illustrates. Ajahn Mun told about an unnamed disciple who during his wanderings came upon a village at dusk. Unfamiliar with the area, he asked the inhabitants for a suitable place to stay. The village folk guided him to a forest, but did not tell him that it contained a cemetery. The first night he rested peacefully. On the following day he saw the villagers pass by carrying a corpse, which was later cremated on a pyre a few meters from the spot where he had set up his glot. The burning of the remains took place right before his eyes. After the villagers left at nightfall, he was tormented by fear. Neither recitation nor meditation on death would help. When he closed his eyes to meditate, all he saw was a long line of ghosts coming towards him. After several hours of this, he reminded himself that as a Tudong monk he should be fearless, able to face death, ghosts, and any other danger, and that if he succumbed to this haunting fear, he would be a disgrace to the Tudong tradition. So, confronting his fear, he approached the burning corpse. Quote, putting on his robes, he started toward the funeral pyre, but after a few steps he couldn't move. It was as if his feet had been nailed to the ground. His heart pounded and his body perspired as if it were exposed to the noonday sun. Through sheer strength of will, he managed to drag himself to the pyre. Whatever is going to happen, let it happen, he said to himself. He forced himself to look at the partly burnt corpse. He almost fainted when he saw the skull burned white through long exposure to the fire. But fighting his fear, he sat down facing the corpse a few feet away and made it the theme of his meditation. He forced the mind to recite, I'm destined to die like this corpse. Why should I be afraid? I'm going to die sooner or later. What's the point of being afraid? While focusing on the recitation, still struggling with his fear of ghosts, the monk heard a strange sound behind him, as if somebody were approaching. The footsteps were silent for a while, then started again. Someone was preparing to attack him from behind, or so it seemed. Fear overcame him, and his breathing became violent. He was about to jump up and run away, crying, "Ghost, help!" when he heard a sound like someone chewing something crunchy. He managed to restrain his panic and opened his eyes. In the darkness, he saw a village dog. It was sniffing the food that the villagers had left as offerings to the spirits. So it's you who have frightened me all this time, he thought, pitying himself and thinking what a coward he had been, despite his resolution to face whatever came his way. Had this monk not been able to use the Dhamma of self-control to check his fear, Ajahn Mun's biographer writes, his fear might have driven him mad. This experience enabled the disciple of Ajahn Mun's to take his teacher's training to heart. From then on, he made a resolution to confront whatever he feared the most. A monk might wander for several years without spending a night in a cemetery. An account of Ajahn Chah's shows how devastating the first experience can be, no matter how well prepared the monk is. In late 1947, Ajahn Chah was in Nakhon district in Nakhon Phanom. When he arrived at Krong Forest Monastery, he found that the meditation teacher there was following the traditional Tudong practice of dwelling in a cemetery. If Ajahn Chah wanted to stay at this wat, he had to do likewise. He had never stayed overnight in a cremation ground. Now at the age of 29, he forced himself to try it. He persuaded a Pakao to go with him. And a Pakao is like an anagarika, like an eight precept monastic. Quote, if I tried to reason with myself, I'd never go. So I grabbed a Pakao and just went. When I got there, words can't describe the way I felt. The Pakao wanted to camp right next to me, but I wouldn't have it. I made him move away. Otherwise, I'd have counted on him for support. Well, just as it was getting dark, I had my chance. In they came, carrying a corpse. Just my luck. I couldn't even feel my feet touch the ground. I wanted to get out of there so badly. They wanted me to do some funeral chants, but I wouldn't get involved. I just walked away. In a few minutes after they'd gone, I just walked back and found that they had buried the corpse right next to my spot, making the bamboo used for carrying it into a bed for me to stay on. Though afraid, Ajahn Chah told the Pakao to set up his glot about 40 meters away. A distance closer than that, he figured, would make him feel too secure. Quote, when it was dark, Ajahn Chah says, I got into my mosquito net. It felt as if I had a 7-tiered wall all around me. Seeing my trusty alms bowl there beside me was like seeing an old friend. Even a bowl can be a friend sometimes. Its presence beside me was comforting. I had a bowl for a friend at last. Ajahn Chah survived the first night there, having gotten his initial fear under control. Then later in the afternoon, villagers brought another corpse, this time an adult, and cremated it about 20 meters from Ajahn Chah's spot, right in front of his glot. Again, Ajahn Chah did not go and do any rites for them. He waited until they left before he forced himself to take a look. Quote, "The fire from the burning corpse flickered red and green, and the flames pattered softly. I wanted to do walking meditation in front of the body, but could hardly bring myself to do it. Eventually I got into my mosquito net. The stench from the burning flesh lingered all through the night. As the flame flickered softly, I turned my back on the fire. I forgot about sleep. I couldn't even think of it. My eyes were fixed, rigid with fear. And there was nobody to turn to. There was only me. I had to rely on myself. I could think of nowhere to go. There was nowhere to run to in that pitch-black night." Because of the cultural context in which they were reared, Tudor monks believed that the world they inhabited consisted of spirits as well as people. Even in the most isolated places, a monk knew that sooner or later some being would pay him a visit. This happened to Ajahn Chah. As he sat with his back to the fire, he heard someone or something approach his glot. Quote, "I don't know what it was, but there came a sound of shuffling from the fire behind me. Had the coffin just collapsed? Or maybe a dog was getting the corpse? But no, it sounded more like a buffalo walking steadily around. Then it started walking towards me just like a person. It walked up behind me, the footsteps heavy, like a buffalo's, and yet not. The leaves crunched under the footsteps as it made its way around to the front. But it didn't really come up to me, it just circled around in front, and then went off in the direction of the pakao. Then all was quiet. It must have been about half an hour later when the footsteps started coming back from the direction of the pakao. Just like a person, it came right up to me this time, heading for me as if to run me over. I closed my eyes and refused to open them." Ajahn Chah did not know what it was, but his fear and his belief in the existence of local spirits made him think of many possibilities. He had never experienced such fear in his life. Quote, "It got closer and closer until it stopped dead in front of me and just stood still. I felt as if it were waving burnt hands back and forth in front of my closed eyes. Oh, this was really it. I threw out everything. I forgot all about Buddha, Dhammo, and Sangha. I forgot everything else. There was only the fear in me, stacked in full to the brim. My thoughts couldn't go anywhere else. There was only fear. From the day I was born, I had never experienced such fear. Buddha and Dhammo had disappeared. I don't know where. There was only fear welling up inside my chest until it felt like a tightly stretched drum skin." Ajahn Chah managed to regain his mindfulness, and then he began to look inward to see where his fear lay. Quote, "I sat as if I wasn't touching the ground and simply noted what was going on. The fear was so great that it filled me like a jar completely filled with water. If you pour water until the jar is completely full, and then pour in some more, the jar will overflow. Likewise, the fear built up so much within me that it reached its peak and began to overflow. What am I so afraid of anyway? A voice inside me asked. I'm afraid of death, another voice answered. Well then, where is this thing, death? Why all the panic? Look where death abides. Where is death? Death is within me. If death is within you, then where are you going to run to escape it? If you run away, you die. If you stay here, you die. Wherever you go, it goes with you, because death lies within you. There's nowhere you can run to. Whether you are afraid or not, you die just the same. There's nowhere to escape death. By investigating his fear, Ajahn Chah was able to deal with it effectively, and this led to insight. Quote, as soon as I had thought this, my perception seemed to change right around. All the fear completely disappeared, as easily as turning over one's own hand. It was truly amazing. So much fear, and yet it could disappear just like that. Non-fear arose in its place. Now my mind rose higher and higher until I felt as if I was in the clouds. Later that night, rain began to fall. The wind was strong and the rain thundered down in a heavy torrent. Quote, but I wasn't afraid of dying now. I wasn't afraid that the branches of the trees might come crashing down on me. I paid it no mind. I sat unmoving. By the time the rain had stopped, Ajahn Chah, his robes, and his galot were soaking wet. It was like being out in an open field. Ajahn Chah now experienced a wave of self-pity, a feeling of being forsaken. Such feelings were common among young Tudong monks when facing similar situations. He felt sorry for himself. Quote, I cried. The tears flowed down my cheeks. I cried as I thought to myself, why am I sitting here like some sort of orphan or abandoned child, sitting, soaking in the rain like a man who owns nothing, like an exile? Then I thought further, all those people sitting comfortably in their homes right now probably don't even suspect that there is a monk sitting, soaking in the rain all night like this. What's the point of it all? Thinking like this, I began to feel so thoroughly sorry for myself that the tears came gushing out. Ajahn Chah must have caught himself brooding, since his next thought was, they're not good things anyway, these tears. Let them flow right on out until they're all gone. He continued to sit with this thought. Quote, I sat and listened. After conquering my feelings, I just sat and watched all manner of things arise in me. So many things that were possible to know, but impossible to describe. And I thought of the Buddha's words, Pachatang veditabo vinyuhi, the wise will know for themselves. That I had endured such suffering and sat through the rain like this. Who was there to experience it with me? Only I could know what it was like. There was so much fear, and yet the fear disappeared. When it was time to go on alms round the next day, the Pakao came to Ajahn Chah. Ajahn, he said, did you see anything last night? It came from where you were. Its behavior scared me. I had to take out the knife and threaten it. Then it went away. Ajahn Chah, however, refused to discuss it and told the Pakao to stop talking. Actually, he did not want to say any more for fear that the Pakao might run away. Unlike the monk in the preceding case who found that the ghost was just a dog, Ajahn Chah and his companion never figured out the mystery. Ajahn Lee is the only other Tudong monk to have given a detailed account of his ordeal at a forest cemetery. Ajahn Lee admits to having an instinctive fear of charnel grounds. Throughout his lay life, he never stepped into one. Even when his relatives died, he managed to avoid approaching cremation pyres. One of the reasons he left the life of a village monk was because he had to perform funeral rites. But now he was a wandering monk, and villagers expected him to stay right next to the cremation pyres in the cemetery. It was while he was wandering in the northern region in 1932 that Ajahn Lee had to face his fear of the dead. Ajahn Lee was then 26 years old. He had met another Tudong monk, Prat Chui, and they became travel companions. One day they came upon a village in Saket Mountain, Chiang Mai province, and were invited to stay. Some villagers built a hut for them in the midst of a large charnel ground, full of graves and heaps of white, weathered bones. The two monks had been staying in the hut for several days when some villagers invited Prat Chui to stay in another spot. Now Ajahn Lee was left alone, the remains of an old cremation only about 6 meters away. Quote, a few days later, well before dawn, a villager came with a little cone of flowers and incense, saying that he was going to bring someone to stay with me as my disciple. I thought to myself, at least now I'll be a little less lonely. I had been feeling scared for quite a few days running, to the point that every time I sat in meditation, I'd start feeling numb all over. Later on that morning after my meal, a large group of villagers came, bringing a corpse with them. The corpse hadn't been placed in a coffin, but was simply wrapped in a cloth. As soon as I saw it, I told myself, you're in for it now. If I were to leave, I'd lose face with the villagers, but the idea of staying on didn't appeal to me either. The realization hit me, the corpse was probably my disciple. Around 4 p.m., the villagers cremated the corpse near Ajahn Lee's hut. From where he lay, he could see the corpse being burnt, and the same fear again arose in Ajahn Lee. Quote, when it caught fire, its arms and legs started sticking up into the air, as yellow as if they had been smeared with turmeric. By evening, the body had fallen apart at the waist. It was still black in the flames. Just before nightfall, the villagers returned home, leaving Ajahn Lee alone. Unlike Ajahn Chah, who chose to investigate his fear, Ajahn Lee prevented the feeling from overwhelming him by withdrawing into samadhi. Quote, I hurried back to my banana leaf hut and sat in meditation, ordering my mind not to leave the hut, to the point where my ears went blank. I didn't hear any sound at all. My mind still had a certain amount of self-awareness, but no perception of where I was, of courage or fear or of anything at all. I stayed this way until daybreak. At the crack of dawn, Prachui got back. Ajahn Lee felt a bit more secure now that he had a companion. Ajahn Lee was curious if his fellow monk was as brave as he appeared to be. Quote, Prachui had a habit of sitting in the hut with me and having Dhamma talks. He'd do the talking, I'd do the listening. But I could tell from the tone of his voice that he wasn't all he made himself out to be. Once a villager came and asked him, "Are you afraid of the dead?" Prachui didn't say yes or no. All he said was, "What's there to be afraid of? When a person dies, there isn't anything left at all. While you yourself can eat dead chickens, dead ducks, dead cows, and dead water buffaloes without a second thought." That was the sort of thing he'd always be saying. I thought to myself, what a show-off. He doesn't want other people to know he's afraid. Well, tomorrow we'll have to see just how brave he really is. The next day, a villager invited one of the Tudong monks to accept donations at his home. Ajahn Lee accepted and went to the village, leaving Prachui in the hut by himself. When he returned the following day, Prachui was gone. Ajahn Lee learned that late the night before, some villagers had brought the body of a dead girl to bury in the cemetery. Prachui immediately gathered his bowl and robes and fled in the middle of the night. This was the last Ajahn Lee ever saw of Prachui. This experience in the cemetery must have cured Ajahn Lee of his fear, because a few years later we find him spending 3 months in a cemetery. In 1935, Ajahn Lee passed through the town of Chanthaburi in eastern Thailand. The local people asked him to spend the 3-month retreat in a nearby cemetery. Ajahn Lee accepted. He had quite overcome his fear, a big transformation for someone who for 19 years of his lay life refused to go near a cremation ground. Unlike Ajahn Lee, Ajahn Juan does not seem to have been afraid of corpses. He came across a dead body during his first year as a Tudong monk. He was 23 then. This was in 1943 when he was on his way to Ubon. Walking through a Mai forest around noontime, he smelled a strong stench. Knowing that it was not the smell of a dead animal, he looked around. In a ditch he found a corpse. Quote, "It stank so badly. Near the corpse was a tin pail, a machete, and a palkama cloth with a small bag." Ajahn Juan thought, "I have come across a treasure which is hard to find. I should use it as a subject of meditation." So he put his Tudong gear under the shade of a tree and came back to meditate, standing near the corpse. Quote, "The corpse must have been left here at least 5 or 6 days ago. The body was disintegrating. The intestines were infested with maggots. Vultures and crows must have scrambled for it. Both eyes were full of maggots and the mouth full of worms. Chest and both legs were also infested with worms. The stench was strong." He had been meditating on the corpse for a few hours when 2 villagers came by. He asked them if he could spend the night by the corpse to meditate on it all night. The villagers thought it was not a good idea. Quote, "If you stay here and the police come by, they may suspect that you killed him," they told him. "You better leave." So Ajahn Juan continued on his journey. At dusk he reached another village, Pon Nam Tang, in Amnacharan district, Ubon province. He set up his glot under a tree at the edge of a cemetery and then bathed. At nightfall he went inside his glot, prayed to the Buddha, chanted, meditated, and visualized the corpse that he had seen during the day. When his mind was calmed, there appeared a vision of, quote, "A dozen corpses all over me. Can't even move my body or legs. Every time I move, my body touches the corpses. I then meditate on my body and realize that it will disintegrate like these corpses. This process is inevitable. This night the mind is calm, cool, and rested. The happiness is beyond expression." What do the monks' accounts tell us about confronting fear? When a monk receives the visit of a tiger or a ghost, he may react in one of 3 ways. First, if he cannot handle the fear, his meditation goes to pieces. That is, he may lose his mind and flee in horror. Second, if he is able to calm his mind, he gains wisdom and learns to face his fears with mindfulness. Third, he may be so transformed that he no longer has any fear at all. This happened to many monks who, during their many years of observing Tudong practices, gradually purified their minds, steadily replacing fear with indomitable courage, until, as Ajahn Mun said, they were fit to live anywhere, go anywhere, and rest anywhere, no longer troubled by fear. At this point, a monk would no longer need to stay in a charnel ground. Once a monk had contemplated death externally and had formed a clear picture of it, he then turned inward to contemplate his own body and his own death until he became thoroughly familiar with the idea. Then, as Ajahn Mahabua says, quote, the external cemetery gradually becomes unnecessary because we've caught onto the principle within ourselves and don't need to rely on anything outside. We contemplate our body to see it as a cemetery, just like the external cemetery, both while it's alive and after it dies. We can compare each aspect with the outside, and the mind gradually runs out of problems of its own accord. So I'll just leave it there for today. And are there any questions that anyone might have?
Ajahn, it seems like the villagers like to bring monks to the charnel grounds. Is there a reason why, like traditionally, why they would have monks there?
Yeah, I mean, that might be a good question for Ajahn Gai. I could offer some guesses, but he probably would have a much better sense of that. I think one possible reason is also, the monks would often be involved in, performing some kind of like funeral rites or chanting, for deceased people, as was kind of mentioned in the reading. So I think that, would be something that the lay people would probably really be wanting and appreciating from the forest monk, for him to be able to help out in that way. But maybe Ajahn Gai has other thoughts as well.
Maybe they want a monk there, like to give them a kind of secure feeling. Oh, there's a monk there in the charnel ground, so all the ghosts will go to the monk, not to me.
Yeah, actually, that's a very good point. Traditionally, people in Thailand, very strong fear of spirits, and it's said that the charnel grounds or areas that were rumored to be haunted would be places where the villagers would be terrified of going, or even if they had to pass through there or pass around there, it would be very difficult for them to do that. So yeah, like Ajahn Gai is saying, maybe the presence of a monk would make them feel a lot more comfortable.
One was established on a charnel ground, so that's, and Wat Nanachat as well. And then there's at Wat Nanachat there is a charnel ground that's in the monastery, so the monks will have a chance to be there and be around the corpse, and it's burning all day, and the monks actually help light it on fire. So it's it's kind of a special thing. And for the local village around Wat Nanachat, then that's like kind of their local burial ground. And I think most of the monks who stay at Wat Nanachat have had that. Like even when I was there we took part in a funeral, and were able to watch a corpse burning. So it's kind of very common.
Yes, Ajahn, I was just wondering what the name of the book is.
Oh yes, so it's called Forest Recollections, Wandering Monks in 20th-Century Thailand. We have several copies down in the library.
Less of a question, more of just a reflection. That is, generally speaking, we're not born with fear, so it's experiences and conditioning that creates it. And as I sit here and listen to these
great stories and these experiences, I just keep thinking about how our mind just grabs that fear and creates and makes it bigger, sort of snowballish. So if we can learn to unpackage it, which is mindfulness and whatnot, but quite powerful, but very subtle, because the fear seems to win out. So anyway, just a reflection, but appreciate you reading those.
Any other last questions anyone might have? Okay, thank you.